Hello, my name is Ross Chapman from the University of Victoria, and this is a story about a mystery of sound in the ocean.
Identify these sounds. Name that animal.
What's that sound? The sound you just heard was recorded years ago in July 1982 during an experiment to characterize what we now call the soundscape in the oceans around New Zealand. Today we know a great deal about sounds in the ocean, but 40 years ago it wasn't the same. The experiment in New Zealand was one of the very first with the purpose to study noise in the ocean. What were the sound sources, both natural and sound produced by human activities like shipping? I became involved with the analysis of the data from the experiment a few years later. Studying those data was like opening a book that nobody had ever read before. It was a very exciting time because we learned something new about sound in the ocean every day. The main feature of the experiment was the towed line array of hydrophones. It was towed behind the ship for about 3 weeks, collecting data continuously, in other words, listening to all the sounds in the ocean and all the time. And more than just listening, the hydrophone array is an acoustic antenna, so we could know the direction the sounds were coming from, and that was unique. Even in today's world, when most of the long-term recordings are made with single hydrophones, so you can hear, but you can't figure out where the sound was coming from. We found all kinds of sound sources: noise from waves generated by wind at the sea surface, noise from very occasional ships passing through the basin at distance, sounds from the very frequent underwater earthquakes, and the curious sound that I played at first. It was a highly repeatable sound, so regular that we first thought it was from a mechanical source, but eventually convinced ourselves that it was biological. And since it sounded like a duck quacking, it became known as bioduck. And you can see the data recording in the slide below, a series of 4 pulses. Quack, 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 quack. Although we heard the sound in all the experimental recordings, we didn't know what animal was making the sound. There were no sightings of whales or any other creatures from the ship, so whatever was making the sound was at some distance away. But we did learn a few very interesting things about the sounds. For instance, we learned that the sound stopped at times when there were earthquakes, loud noises that boomed very intensely through the ocean, sometimes for several minutes. When all was quiet again, the sound started up. But the most interesting feature came from the array data. The array could resolve the sound from different individual speakers at different places in the ocean. I'll show this fascinating result from the Kiwi bioduck data. Possibly it's a very early recording, perhaps the first, of a conversation between several speakers, whatever they were. The slide shows a plot of clock time in the vertical direction with time increasing down, and the dark against array beam direction. The dark patches show the tracks of several speakers traveling in slightly different directions at distance from the array. Note that when speaker A talks, B listens mostly and then makes a response. Later, some other speakers butt into the conversation. There are probably at least 4 speakers. One can only guess what they are talking about. That's where I left the analysis, but the mystery of what animal was making the sound has always been in the back of my mind. Over time, There have been suggestions made that the sound was from minke
Identify these
whales.
sounds.
Maybe
Name that
they are
animal.
correct, but I'd love to know for sure. Hello.
Great. That was great, Ross. Thank you so much. We're going to field questions for your session now, so you can turn on your camera and unmute. And I'll go in and look at this Q&A. Our first question is from James Deneen of New Scientist. And he says, the word conservation implies more than just communication, even language. Is there a reason to think of this as a conversation rather than more general interactions? And why is it not conclusive that these are minke whales?
I don't think, well, I can't turn on my video because it won't let me yet.
Oh, I'll help you with that.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. There. Yeah, so interesting question. We never, yeah, I don't, the first thought that came to mind was that these animals, whatever they were using sound to communicate something to each other. I don't know what it was. We never saw any. There was no record of any sightings of any animals during the experiment. We did learn afterwards that a lot of other researchers who listened to sound in the oceans around that time heard the same sound, but also didn't know what it was because they could never see anything. So the reason, you know, the speakers were actually obviously a distance from the array. So whatever they were, there was no other independent information about what they were other than the acoustic information. I think since the time we looked at these data, there's been more work done on these sounds, and some people think they are um, Antarctic minke whales that just moved north in the southern winter. But yeah, that's the best I can do.
And can you let us know what inspired you to present about this at ASA this year?
Why not? Um, our technical chairman had this idea of having a session called "What's That Sound?" And as I said in the talk, the resolution of this of what these sounds were has always been in the back of my mind. And curiously, I kept all the recordings, so it was easy to revisit them. Um, it turns out that um, the minke whales, if they are minke whales, the sounds that we recorded were similar to what people say now are sounds produced by these whales. They are quite numerous in the southern oceans, so I'm sure there's the problem. The problem has always been that um, the minke whales are often found in the Antarctic, so it's very difficult to mount experiments to go there and listen to the sounds that they make. It gets kind of expensive. But I think the real feature is that we had the acoustic antenna, so we could do something that's sort of the holy grail is in this kind of research is to listen to individual speakers, which we did. We were able to do that.
That's so interesting, and thank you for sharing that detail. Um, We have a question here from Richard Lovett, a couple. The first one is the title says both Bio Duck and Bio Goose. Are
All right.
there separate
All
sounds?
right.
Or what's the why Bio Goose?
Okay. That's a historical interesting story. When I was working on this with the folks down in New Zealand, there were some Australian researchers, namely Doug Cato, that came in. Doug knows everything about marine mammal sounds in the ocean. And he said he listened to what we were listening to, and he said, we hear the same thing in waters off Australia. So we said to him, oh yeah, well, we call ours Kiwi Bio Duck, so we'll call yours Bio Goose.
It makes me think of Duck Duck Goose.
Actually, and the other thing was that the Australians actually had a wider frequency bandwidth for their recordings, so the sounds were somewhat sharper than what we were recording. Our bandwidth was around from 0 to 250 hertz. It turns out that captures most of the frequency band that these animals are transmitting.
Um, Richard would also like to know how far from the array were the speakers and how far apart are they? Um,
Well, we don't know exactly how far they are because at the time we didn't know. We would have to know what the sound level was at the speaker, and we didn't know that. And it's only recently that information like that has been available. So we could say that they were roughly tens of kilometers away and traveling in groups that could have been, several hundred meters apart.
and are there sounds that minke whales are known for?
Um, the sound, well, the bioduct, yes, that's something that has been attributed to them in more recently. They also make a kind of a low frequency, I guess you'd call it a moan or something like that. But the the question is, when do they make the bioduct sound, and why do they make it? And I wouldn't say that the answer is really known even today. Our idea was that it was some type of communication.
And one more question from Richard is, what do you think could be done with this type of work in the future with another array?
Oh, if well, I would advocate for the use of any kind of an acoustic array, and then which is an acoustic antenna in future work, because um, the um, the work that's done today with single hydrophones can tell you about intensities of all the sounds, but it really can't tell you. It really can't resolve sounds from individual speakers like what could be done with an acoustic antenna, and with some information about the source level, the sound level at the whale itself when it transmits. We can get a better estimate of how far they are away. So things like that. But the array adds great value to any kind of study like this.
That makes sense. We have one last question. This one's from James Deneen of New Scientist. Given that this data was recorded more than 40 years ago, oh, I think I already answered this. Is there, when you're talking about it at ASA, what's your approach going to be for your presentation?
Well, very similar to what you just heard, I'm going to outline the mystery and also show the the kind of well, when the data were taken 40 years ago, there was a lot less known, so we were really working in the dark. The other things that I'll show in the technical presentation is what the array data actually looked like, and features like that would make sense to some of the marine mammal acousticians. But it really, I hope to inspire more work about minke whales, if that's what they are.
And that actually we do have one last question from Daniel Lawler. He's wondering, um, there's there's been some efforts to try to learn how whales talk to each other in recent years. Do you think the bioduck does contain a conversation, and could this point the way towards minke language in the future?
Well, I hope so. You know, we didn't publish anything about this originally because we didn't know what the speakers were. But you know, when you look at that information that we got from the array, it's certainly tempting to say it's a communication. But what they were talking about, I don't know. With the Again, with the array, if you can resolve sound from individual sources, you can speculate on a lot of things about what what the sounds what the animals were doing when they were making the sounds. Maybe they were saying, "Hey, the fishing's good over here," or something like that. Actually, those are baleen whales, so they don't they well they might be hunting. They might be just on holiday. And who knows?
The mystery persists.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ross. It was great to hear from you and hear about your research. I put a link into the chat for journalists who want to see the embargoed press release about Ross's session. It is embargoed until Thursday, the 21st at 10:05 a.m. And if you want to click on the link in the chat, uh, you can see the press release.